I'm Mason Reynolds, 34, watching my sister Kimberly pop champagne at our mother's funeral reception. Mom's body wasn't even cold when Kim celebrated her $700 million inheritance. Meanwhile, I stood in the corner clutching the only thing Mom left me, an old iPhone in a worn leather case. Everyone thought I got nothing of value. They whispered about how the disappointment sun was finally cut off. If they only knew what that phone contained. The truth about my sister would destroy everything she'd built on lies. Before I tell you how my own sister betrayed me and what I discovered that changed everything, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and hit subscribe if family betrayal stories hit close to home. Growing up as a Mitchell was supposed to be a privilege. Our family name adorned the sleek headquarters of Mitchell Pharmaceuticals in downtown Boston, a company my grandfather built from nothing. Our sprawling estate in Brookline had 7 bedrooms, a pool house, and grounds that seemed to stretch forever. But despite all that wealth, I never felt like I belonged. From the beginning, it was clear who the favorite was. Kimberly, 3 years my senior, was everything my parents wanted in an heir. She had our father Robert's business acumen and our mother Eleanor's poise and charm. Her report cards were perfect, her extracurriculars impressive, her friends carefully selected from Boston's elite families. When she was accepted to Harvard at 17, my parents threw a gala that was covered in the Boston Globe's society pages. "Your sister understands what it means to be a Mitchell," my father would say whenever he caught me taking apart computers in my room instead of networking at his business functions. "She's carrying on the legacy." That legacy was important to him. Mitchell Pharmaceuticals had become one of the largest privately held pharmaceutical companies in the Northeast under his leadership. The pressure to continue that success weighed heavily on both of us, but Kimberly seemed to thrive under it while I wilted. My academic performance was decent but unremarkable. Where I truly excelled was with technology. By 14, I was building custom computers and helping teachers troubleshoot the school's network. My mother occasionally bragged about my little hobby to her friends, but it was clear she didn't see it as a real career path. The first time I noticed something off about Kimberly was when I won a regional science fair at 16. It wasn't a huge achievement, but it earned me a small write-up in the local paper and a rare moment of praise from my father. During the family dinner celebration, I caught Kimberly glaring at me when she thought no one was looking. Her expression was cold, calculating, so different from her usual perfect smile that it startled me. The next day, my project mysteriously disappeared from my room. When I asked Kimberly if she'd seen it, she suggested that perhaps I'd been careless. "You've never been very organized, Mason," she said with concern that didn't reach her eyes. "Maybe you should focus more on consistency rather than one-off successes." I couldn't prove anything, but I knew. And that pattern continued through our teenage years. Any time I received positive attention, Kimberly found ways to undermine it or redirect the spotlight. After high school, Kimberly went on to get her MBA and joined the family business at 24, quickly rising to become our father's right hand. I chose a different path that disappointed everyone at technical college, where I studied computer science and network security. "We've spent generations building this company for you," my mother said when I told them my plans. "For both of you. Kim can handle the family business," I replied. "She's better at it anyway." My father shook his head. "Every business needs loyal people it can trust. Even if you don't have your sister's business instincts, you're still a Mitchell." But I was stubborn. I graduated and took a job at a tech support company, refusing the position my father had created for me at Mitchell Pharmaceuticals. It was the first time I'd really defied them, and the family tension was palpable at every holiday and birthday thereafter. Then came the incident that created the real rift between us. I was 22, just starting my career, when I came home for Christmas. I'd brought my laptop to do some work during the visit. While connected to the family network, I noticed some unusual traffic patterns, the kind that indicated someone was moving large amounts of data to external servers. Being in tech support and having a background in network security, my curiosity was piqued. I traced the traffic and found it was coming from Kimberly's home office. She was transferring company financial documents to a private server. When I dug deeper, I discovered discrepancies in some of the research funding reports, money being allocated to projects that didn't seem to exist in the official company records. Concerned, I approached my father with what I'd found. His reaction shocked me. "You hacked into company systems?" he demanded, his face reddening. "No, I just noticed unusual network traffic while on our home Wi-Fi," I explained. "Dad, there's something strange going on with the research budget allocations." Before I could continue, Kimberly walked into his study. "What's this about budget allocations?" she asked smoothly. When my father explained, her expression shifted from concern to pity. "Oh, Mason," she sighed. "I know it's been hard for you, watching the company succeed without you. But fabricating problems isn't the way to get attention." "Fabricating? I'm showing you actual data," I protested. Kimberly placed a hand on our father's shoulder. "Dad, remember what Dr. Levine said about Mason's issues with jealousy? How he might act out because he feels inadequate compared to the family's success." I was stunned speechless. Dr. Levine was the family therapist I'd seen briefly after a difficult period in high school. Those sessions were supposed to be private. "I never said anything like that," I finally managed. My father looked between us, then slowly closed my laptop. "Mason, I think you should focus on your own career and leave company matters to those involved in the business." That night, I overheard Kimberly on the phone in the garden. "It's handled," she said to someone. "He doesn't have proof, and they never believe him over me anyway." I left the next morning, cutting my Christmas visit short. Over the next few years, my contact with the family dwindled to obligatory holiday calls and occasional stiff dinners when I couldn't avoid them. Kimberly continued her meteoric rise at Mitchell Pharmaceuticals, eventually becoming COO at 34. I built a modest but comfortable life for myself, eventually becoming a cybersecurity consultant for small businesses. We existed in separate orbits, connected only by the increasingly frail thread of family obligation. Until my mother got sick, and everything changed again. The call came on a rainy Tuesday 2 years ago. My father's voice sounded older than his 68 years when he told me my mother had been diagnosed with a rare form of cancer. Despite our strained relationship, I drove to Boston immediately. When I arrived at Massachusetts General Hospital, Kimberly was already there, dressed in an impeccable charcoal suit despite having presumably rushed from work. She was speaking with my mother's oncologist in hushed tones, clipboard in hand, looking every bit the devoted daughter taking charge of a difficult situation. "Mason," she acknowledged me with a nod when I approached. "I've been updating Dr. Warner on Mom's medical history." The doctor gave me a practiced smile. "Your sister has been incredibly thorough. You're lucky to have someone so knowledgeable managing your mother's care." I bit back a retort about how I could have contributed to the conversation too, had I been called earlier. Instead, I asked to see my mother. Eleanor Mitchell had always been a force of nature, elegant, commanding, the kind of woman who ran charity galas with military precision while never smudging her lipstick. Seeing her in a hospital bed, skin sallow against the white sheets, knocked the wind out of me. "Mason," she said, reaching for my hand with fingers already thinner than I remembered. "You didn't need to rush here. Kimberly has everything under control." Those words, "Kimberly has everything under control," would become a refrain over the coming months. My attempts to participate in discussions about treatment options were gently but firmly rebuffed. When I offered to take shifts staying with my mother, Kimberly had already arranged for a private nurse. When I suggested getting a second opinion from an oncologist I'd researched, I was told Kimberly had already consulted with the top specialists in the country. I tried reconnecting with my father during this time, thinking our shared concern for my mother might bridge the gap between us. I found him withdrawn, spending long hours at the office despite being semi-retired. "Your sister is handling your mother's care and the day-to-day operations at the company," he told me when I suggested he cut back on work to spend time with Mom. "Someone needs to keep an eye on the bigger picture." As weeks turned to months, my mother's condition fluctuated. There would be promising treatments followed by devastating setbacks. Through it all, Kimberly maintained her position as gatekeeper. She controlled the flow of information to family and friends, managed the treatment schedule, and most importantly, limited my access to our mother. "Mom needs rest, Mason. You can see her next week," she would say, or, "The doctors are running tests today. It's better if you come another time." On the rare occasions when I did get time alone with my mother, she seemed heavily medicated, drifting in and out of lucidity. Once, she gripped my hand with surprising strength and whispered, "Be careful around your sister," before her eyes fluttered closed again. When I mentioned this comment to my father, he dismissed it as medication-induced confusion. 6 months into my mother's illness, I began noticing strange visitors at the hospital and later at our family home when she was well enough to return there. Men in expensive suits who didn't introduce themselves. Hushed conversations that stopped when I entered rooms. Kimberly was holding business meetings, but they didn't feel like normal Mitchell Pharmaceuticals operations. One evening, I arrived at the house unannounced, hoping to spend some time with my mother. Through the partially open door of her bedroom, I saw Kimberly sitting beside her with documents spread across a lap desk. "Just sign here, Mom," Kimberly was saying, guiding my mother's shaking hand. "It's just the updated power of attorney we discussed." My mother's eyes were unfocused, her movements sluggish. She clearly had no idea what she was signing. "What's going on?" I demanded, pushing the door open fully. Kimberly didn't even flinch. "Mason, you're not supposed to be here until tomorrow," she said calmly, gathering the papers. "Mom and I are handling some personal business." "She's heavily medicated," I said. "She doesn't even know what she's signing." "Don't be ridiculous. Mom requested these changes weeks ago. I'm just helping with the paperwork now that she's feeling stronger." I looked at my mother, who seemed to be struggling to keep her eyes open. "Mom? Do you understand what you're signing?" Before she could answer, Kimberly stood between us. "That's enough, Mason. You're upsetting her, and Dr. Warner specifically said to avoid stressful situations. The only stressful situation is you manipulating her into signing documents when she's not competent." My mother made a small distressed sound, and Kimberly used that as an excuse to call for the nurse and have me removed from the room. In the hallway, she confronted me with cold fury. "If you continue interfering with Mom's care and our family business, you'll be cut off completely," she hissed. "No visits, no information, nothing. Dad agrees with me that your paranoia is becoming a problem." "Is that a threat?" I asked, incredulous. "It's reality. You abandoned this family and the business years ago. You don't get to swoop in now and question how we handle things." She straightened her jacket. "Go back to your little tech job, Mason. We've managed without you for years, and will continue to do so." That night, I tried calling my father, but he didn't pick up. The next morning, he called me back with a clear message. "Your sister says you caused a scene at the house. Mason, I'm asking you to stop causing trouble. Your mother doesn't need this stress right now. Kimberly has everything under control." Those words again. I wanted to scream. Instead, I did the only thing I could think of. I hired a private investigator, an ex-cop named Derek who specialized in financial crimes. I gave him everything I knew about the strange meetings, the documents, my suspicions about company funds. He promised to be discreet, but warned me that without access to internal company records, there wasn't much he could definitively prove. For the next few months, I played by Kimberly's rules, visiting only during designated hours, always with either her or a nurse present. I watched my mother continue to decline, her once sharp mind increasingly clouded by either her illness or her medications. I couldn't tell which. And all the while, I had the gnawing feeling that I was missing something important, something right in front of me that would make sense of all the pieces. 3 months before my mother died, I arrived for one of my supervised visits to find her alone for once. The nurse had stepped out, and Kimberly was in a meeting downstairs. My mother was sleeping, so I sat quietly beside her bed, noticing how much weight she'd lost, how the cancer had hollowed her cheeks and thinned her once lustrous hair. On her bedside table sat her medications, a carefully arranged row of bottles and pill organizers. Out of curiosity, I picked up her pain medication to check the dosage, wondering if that was why she was so sedated during my visits. The bottle felt light. Too light. I opened it and found only 3 pills remaining, though according to the label, it had been filled with 30 tablets just 2 days prior. Either my mother was taking an alarming amount of pain medication, or something was wrong. When the nurse returned, I asked about the medication schedule. She looked confused, checking her records before showing me that my mother was prescribed 1 pill every 6 hours. By that math, the bottle should have contained at least 20 pills, not 3. "I'll have to report this," she said with a frown. "Medication discrepancies are serious." I nodded, relieved that someone else would be looking into it. "Please do. And let me know what you find out." The next day, I received a call from my father, his voice tight with anger. "Mason, what the hell are you playing at now? What are you talking about? Accusing the nursing staff of medication errors? Kimberly says the head nurse is threatening to quit because of your allegations." I was confused. "I didn't accuse anyone. I just noticed Mom's pain medication seemed to be disappearing too quickly." There was a pause before my father spoke again, his voice now frighteningly calm. "Son, I think we need to have a family meeting. Tomorrow at the house, 3 o'clock. The family meeting turned out to be an ambush. My father, Kimberly, the head nurse, and even Dr. Warner were all seated in my father's study when I arrived. On the desk sat a folder and a small stack of papers. "Mason," my father began gravely, "we're here because we're concerned about you and about your mother's care." Before I could respond, Kimberly opened the folder. "Security footage from yesterday," she said, sliding a printed image toward me. It showed someone who resembled me from behind, at my mother's medicine cabinet. "And this," she continued, producing a small evidence bag containing an empty prescription bottle, "was found in the guest bathroom trash after your visit." I stared at the items in disbelief. "That's not... I never took anything. I just noticed the medication was low." Dr. Warner cleared his throat. "Mr. Mitchell, prescription drug misuse is unfortunately common, even in families without history of addiction. There's no shame in seeking help." "Addiction? You think I'm stealing my dying mother's pain medication?" I looked around the room, expecting someone to admit this was a cruel joke. No one smiled. Kimberly pulled out more papers. "This isn't the first time we've had concerns, Mason. In high school, there was the incident with alcohol at 17, and in college, your roommate reported suspicions of drug use to the university." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The alcohol incident had been a single party where many students were caught. The college accusation was completely fabricated. I'd never had any disciplinary issues at school. "That's not true," I said, looking at my father. "Dad, you know that's not true." My father wouldn't meet my eyes. "Your behavior has been erratic since your mother's diagnosis. The constant accusations against your sister, the interference with medical staff, and now this." "I was trying to help. The medication count was wrong. Ask the nurse who was there." "She's been reassigned," Kimberly said smoothly. "At her request, after feeling intimidated by you." It was like being in a nightmare I couldn't wake from. Every defense I offered was countered with another accusation, another piece of evidence that painted me as unstable, jealous, and now a drug thief. By the end of the meeting, new rules were established. I would only be allowed to visit my mother with both a nurse and either my father or sister present. My visits would be limited to 30 minutes, twice a week. And I was strongly encouraged to seek counseling for my issues. As I left the house in a daze, my Aunt Catherine, my mother's sister who had always been kind to me, pulled me aside in the driveway. "Mason, what's happening? Kimberly told everyone you had a breakdown and tried to steal Eleanor's medications. The betrayal cut so deep I could barely speak. That's not what happened, Aunt Kathy. She searched my face, then squeezed my arm. I've never known you to lie, Mason. And I've never quite trusted your sister's perfect act. Call me if you need anything, okay? It was a small comfort, but not enough to counter the damage done. Within days, the story had spread through our extended family and social circle. Mason Mitchell, the disappointing son, had fallen so far as to steal from his dying mother. Some versions included embellishments about past drug problems or mental instability. Friends stopped returning my calls. Cousins who had been warm at Christmas now viewed me with suspicion. Even Derek, the private investigator, suggested we pause our work together until the personal situation was resolved. I was isolated, my character assassinated, and worst of all, my time with my dying mother severely restricted. During my brief supervised visits, she was usually heavily sedated, barely able to recognize me. When she did have moments of lucidity, Kimberly or my father would quickly intervene, claiming she needed rest. The woman who had raised me, who had read me bedtime stories and taught me to tie my shoes, was slipping away, and I couldn't even say a proper goodbye. All because of accusations I couldn't disprove and a sister whose word was unquestioned. One night, alone in my apartment, I drank too much whiskey and contemplated giving up. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe Kimberly was just a competent businesswoman and devoted daughter, and I was the problem, jealous, paranoid, unable to accept my place on the periphery of the family. But something kept nagging at me, that security footage that supposedly showed me taking medication. I'd never seen the actual video, just a conveniently grainy still image of someone with my build and hair color. It didn't prove anything, yet it had been enough to convince everyone of my guilt. Why go to such lengths to keep me away from my mother? What was Kimberly hiding that was worth destroying my reputation and relationship with the family? I didn't have answers, but I knew one thing for certain: my sister had declared war, and I was losing badly. My mother's final weeks played out like a carefully orchestrated performance with Kimberly as both star and director. My twice-weekly supervised visits continued, though they felt increasingly pointless as my mother rarely woke during the strictly enforced 30 minutes I was allowed at her bedside. On one rare occasion, about 2 weeks before the end, I found her awake and relatively alert when I arrived. The nurse stepped out momentarily to get fresh water, and Kimberly was uncharacteristically absent, called away to an emergency at the office. "Mason," my mother whispered, her voice papery thin. "You came." "Of course I came, Mom." I took her frail hand in mine, shocked at how the bones pressed against her translucent skin. "I always come." She frowned slightly, confusion crossing her features. "They said? Sometimes you couldn't visit. Because of problems." My heart sank. "What kind of problems did they say I had, Mom?" She shook her head slightly, clearly struggling to organize her thoughts. "Not sure. Kim handles everything. Says you're troubled." I wanted to defend myself, to tell her about Kimberly's manipulations and lies, but what good would it do now? She was dying, heavily medicated, and had been fed a steady diet of misinformation about me for months. Instead, I just squeezed her hand. "I love you, Mom. I've always loved you." Her eyes, cloudy with medication but suddenly intense, locked onto mine. "My phone," she whispered urgently. "Check my old phone." "What phone, Mom?" "In my drawer. The one with pictures of you. Password is your birthday." Before I could ask more questions, the nurse returned, and my mother's energy seemed to flag. She drifted back to sleep, and despite my attempts to wake her again during my remaining time, she didn't stir. When I tried to mention this conversation to my father the next day, he cut me off immediately. "Your mother is confused, Mason. The medications affect her cognitive function. Dr. Warner warned us about this." "But Dad, she specifically mentioned her phone and..." "Enough! He rarely raised his voice, and the sharp tone startled me into silence. I won't have you upsetting her with more conspiracy theories during the time she has left. My mother died on a Tuesday morning, just as the first hints of spring were appearing in Boston. Kimberly called to inform me, her voice professionally somber. She went peacefully, with Dad and me by her side, she said. The funeral will be on Friday. I felt a stab of pain at not being there for my mother's final moments. Why didn't you call me yesterday when things took a turn? I could have been there too. A pause. It happened very suddenly, Mason. There wasn't time. Later, I would learn from a sympathetic nurse that my mother had been declining for days, and that Kimberly had explicitly left instructions not to inform me until after she passed. The funeral was a glossy, well-attended affair, exactly the kind of social event my mother would have expertly managed in her prime. Boston's elite turned out in force, offering condolences to my father and Kimberly while giving me a wide berth. The whispers followed me around the church and later at the cemetery. That's the son. The one with problems. Such a shame. Tried to steal her medication, I heard. 3 days after we buried my mother, we gathered at the offices of Wellington and Frost, the family's longtime attorneys, for the reading of the will. I had no expectations of a significant inheritance, not after the events of the past months, but I assumed I'd receive something. Some acknowledgement of my place in the family, however tenuous. Milton Wellington, a contemporary of my father who had managed the Mitchell family's legal affairs for decades, seemed uncomfortable as he prepared to read the document. My father sat stiffly in his chair, eyes fixed on some middle distance, while Kimberly was composed as always, dressed in tasteful black, a tissue clutched in her manicured hand though her eyes remained dry. To the matter of the last will and testament of Eleanor Catherine Mitchell, Wellington began formally, before clearing his throat and continuing. What followed was shocking even to my diminished expectations. The will left 95% of my mother's considerable personal fortune separate from the family business to Kimberly. This included real estate, investment portfolios, and her significant shareholding in Mitchell Pharmaceuticals. The estimated value was over $700 million. To my father went their primary residence and some personal items of sentimental value, though he already owned substantial assets in his own name. And to me? To my son, Mason Robert Mitchell, I leave my collection of first edition books, family photographs from the East Wing storage room, and my personal iPhone, currently located in the top drawer of my bedside table. I felt the room spin slightly. Books. Photos. A phone. Wellington looked at me apologetically before continuing with some minor bequests to staff and distant relatives. When he finished, there was a heavy silence in the room. I'd like to see the phone, I said finally. The one mentioned in the will. Kimberly reached into her purse and withdrew an older model iPhone in a worn leather case. I brought it, assuming you'd want it right away. Her tone was sympathetic, but I caught the slight curl at the corner of her mouth, a flash of satisfaction quickly suppressed. I took the phone without comment, slipping it into my jacket pocket. Part of me wanted to turn it on immediately, to see if there was some message from my mother, some explanation for why I'd been so thoroughly disinherited. But something held me back, perhaps the memory of her urgent whisper. Check my old phone. My father left immediately after the reading, barely acknowledging me. Kimberly, however, lingered to speak with Wellington about transitioning assets. As I headed for the door, I heard her making arrangements for a celebration dinner that evening with key executives from Mitchell Pharmaceuticals. We'll be discussing the company's future direction, she was saying. My mother would want us to move forward decisively. 2 hours later, I stood across the street from Giovanni's, one of Boston's most exclusive restaurants, watching through the window as my sister raised a champagne glass and a toast. Around her sat the company's board members and executive team, all smiling, all apparently untroubled by the fact that Eleanor Mitchell had been dead less than a week. Kimberly had won. She had the money, the company, our father's trust, and the respect of everyone in their social circle. I had some books, some photos, and a phone that probably contained nothing but outdated contacts and forgotten text messages. I turned away from the restaurant window and walked back to my car, the iPhone a heavy weight in my pocket. Whatever game Kimberly had been playing, it was over. She had orchestrated a complete victory, isolating me from our dying mother and ensuring I would have no financial stake in the family legacy. All I had left was the hollow ache of grief, not just for my mother, but for the family I'd once believed we were. For 3 weeks after the funeral, I couldn't bring myself to turn on my mother's phone. It sat on my kitchen counter, battery dead, a tangible reminder of everything I'd lost. What was the point? Whatever was on it, photos, messages, contacts, wouldn't change the fact that my mother had cut me out of her will and my sister was now celebrating her massive inheritance. I threw myself into work, taking on extra cybersecurity contracts and spending long hours troubleshooting network issues for clients. Anything to avoid going home to my empty apartment where that phone waited, silently accusing me of failing my mother when she needed me most. Then came the dream. I woke with tears on my face and a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. That morning, I finally plugged in the iPhone and waited for it to charge. When the Apple logo appeared, followed by the lock screen, I hesitated only briefly before typing in my birth date, 0617. The phone unlocked immediately. The home screen was organized with my mother's characteristic precision, absent folders, no notifications cluttering the display. I checked her photos first, scrolling through family holidays, charity events, and garden pictures. Nothing unusual. Her email contained mostly correspondence with friends, appointment reminders, and newsletters. Just as I was beginning to think my dream had been nothing but wishful thinking, I noticed an app one didn't recognize. It looked like a calculator, but when I tapped it, it prompted for another password. On a hunch, I tried my birth date again, but backward, 7160. The app opened to reveal a folder of audio recordings, documents, and photos, all meticulously labeled and dated over the past 3 years. With shaking hands, I tapped the first audio file, titled simply, Suspicions, January 18, 2023. My mother's voice filled my apartment, stronger than I'd heard it in years. This is Eleanor Mitchell, beginning my documentation of concerning activities at Mitchell Pharmaceuticals under Kimberly's leadership. Today I discovered financial reports showing diverted funds from our legitimate research programs to something called Project Lazarus. When I questioned Robert about it, he seemed confused, claiming he'd approved no such project. Kimberly later told me it was a simple accounting error that would be corrected. I don't believe her. I sat stunned, listening as recording after recording detailed my mother's growing suspicions about Kimberly's business activities. She described unauthorized drug trials, falsified research data, and millions in company funds channeled through shell corporations. The most recent recordings, made during her illness, were harder to listen to, her voice weaker, often pausing for breath, but her mind still razor-sharp as she connected the dots. Kimberly threatened me today, my mother whispered in a recording from just 6 months ago. Said if I didn't stop asking questions about Project Lazarus, she would ensure I never saw Mason again. Claims she has evidence he's been stealing from the company for years. It's absurd, but Robert believes everything she says these days. Something's wrong with him too. He's forgetful, confused, sometimes aggressive. Not like himself at all. Between the audio files were photographs, documents signed with what appeared to be my father's forged signature, screenshots of emails discussing manipulated clinical trial data, pictures of Kimberly meeting with men I now recognized as executives from pharmaceutical companies that had been investigated for ethics violations. But the most damning evidence came in a folder labeled Medical, lab results showing elevated levels of arsenic and other heavy metals in samples labeled with my mother's patient number. Alongside these were similar results for my father, though at lower concentrations. A cold realization washed over me. Kimberly hadn't just been stealing from the company or conducting unauthorized trials. She had been poisoning our parents, slowly killing our mother while keeping our father just sick enough to be malleable. The final recording was dated 3 days before my mother died, her voice barely audible. Mason, if you're listening to this, then my plan worked. I've left everything to Kimberly, the money, the company's shares, everything she's been killing me for. It's a trap, my darling boy. The evidence on this phone is just the beginning. There's more in a safe deposit box at First National, key in my jewelry box in the hidden compartment you found when you were 12. The account is in your name. I know what Kimberly's done to my reputation with the doctors, with your father. I know the lies she's told about you. I couldn't fight her directly, I was too weak, and she controls everything now. But I could set this trap. Let her believe she's won everything. Let her incriminate herself further. The condition in the trust requires her to maintain control of the company for 6 months before the assets fully transfer. That's your window, Mason. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you better. I'm sorry I pretended not to know you during those supervised visits. It was the only way to keep Kimberly from suspecting. Find the truth. Save your father. And remember that my greatest treasure was never money or status, it was you. The recording ended, and I sat in stunned silence, tears streaming down my face. My mother hadn't abandoned me. She'd been playing a long game, pretending to favor Kimberly while secretly gathering evidence against her. And she'd left me the one thing that mattered, the truth. I spent the rest of the day and night reviewing everything on the phone, copying files, organizing the evidence. The picture that emerged was horrifying. Kimberly had been using Mitchell Pharmaceuticals to run unauthorized trials of a dangerous experimental drug, falsifying results to hide severe side effects. When our mother discovered this, Kimberly began slowly poisoning her, accelerating the cancer while making it appear she was simply declining naturally. The same poison was being administered to our father in smaller doses, causing cognitive issues that made him increasingly dependent on Kimberly for business decisions. Project Lazarus, it seemed, was a potentially lucrative but extremely dangerous anti-aging compound that had failed official safety protocols. Rather than abandon it, Kimberly had continued development in secret, planning to sell it through offshore subsidiaries to wealthy clients willing to try unregulated treatments. The potential profits were enormous, billions, potentially, but the human cost was unconscionable. My mother had found evidence of at least 12 deaths in the unauthorized trials, all covered up as unrelated health issues. As dawn broke, I knew what I had to do. Kimberly was smart, connected, and ruthless. Taking her down would require careful planning and perfect execution. One mistake, and I'd end up discredited again or worse. I made 3 calls. The first was to Trevor Jenkins, a former prosecutor turned defense attorney who specialized in pharmaceutical cases. The second was to Leah Donovan, the best private investigator in Boston, who had once helped expose a major hospital insurance fraud. The third was to Aunt Catherine, the only family member who might still believe in me. I have evidence, I told each of them, about what really happened to my mother, and what's still happening to my father. Within hours, my apartment became command central for what would become the most important mission of my life, bringing down my sister and saving what remained of my family. For the next month, I lived a double life. To the outside world, I was Mason Mitchell, the disgraced son who'd slunk away after being cut out of his mother's will. I went to work, kept to myself, and made no attempt to contact my father or Kimberly. I wanted them to believe I'd accepted defeat. But behind closed doors, Trevor, Leah, and I worked tirelessly, building an airtight case. Trevor's legal expertise helped us organize the evidence in a way that would be impossible to dismiss as the ravings of a jealous brother. Leah used her investigative skills and contacts to verify my mother's findings and uncover additional proof of Kimberly's crimes. Aunt Catherine proved invaluable in a different way. She maintained her relationship with my father, visiting regularly and subtly observing his condition. What she reported was alarming. "He's deteriorating, Mason," she told me during one of our secret meetings. "Some days he doesn't recognize me. Other days he's almost normal, but then gets confused mid-conversation. And Kimberly controls everything: his food, his medication, who he sees." "Is she letting you bring him anything? Food? Drinks?" I asked. Sometimes I bring his favorite tea. She always insists on preparing it herself, though. Working with a lab contact of Leah's, we provided Catherine with test strips disguised as tea bag tags. The next time she visited, she managed to dip one discreetly into my father's cup. The strip tested positive for the same rare metalloid compound found in my mother's samples. Meanwhile, using the key from my mother's jewelry box, I accessed the safe deposit box she'd mentioned. Inside was a trove of additional evidence, original documents showing Kimberly's forgeries, USB drives containing internal company emails she'd deleted from servers, and most damning of all, a detailed journal in which my mother had meticulously documented her suspicions and findings for over 2 years. She was building a case. The final piece came when Leah managed to turn one of Kimberly's lab technicians, a young woman named Jess, who had growing concerns about the ethics of Project Lazarus but had been too afraid to come forward. Ms. Mitchell told us the test subjects had all signed waivers acknowledging the risks, Jess explained. But I found the original consent forms. They were for a different study entirely, a standard cholesterol medication. The participants had no idea what they were really being given. By the 2-month mark, we had enough evidence to approach the authorities. But there was a complication. Many of Kimberly's contacts extended into local law enforcement and regulatory bodies. We needed to be strategic about who we trusted with this information. Trevor suggested we take our evidence directly to the FBI's Healthcare Fraud Unit and the FDA's Criminal Investigations Division simultaneously. These are federal agencies with jurisdiction over pharmaceutical crimes, he explained. Less chance of Kimberly having influence there. But I had another idea, one that would ensure Kimberly couldn't use her connections to bury the investigation. We need to confront her publicly, I said. Somewhere she can't control the narrative. The quarterly board meeting of Mitchell Pharmaceuticals was scheduled for the following week. As a family member, even one who had been effectively ostracized, I still technically had the right to attend. It's risky, Trevor warned. She'll have home field advantage. Exactly, I replied. She'll be comfortable, confident, surrounded by people she thinks are loyal to her. She won't expect me to show up, let alone challenge her. We spent the next week refining our plan. I would attend the board meeting and present enough evidence to shock the directors, while Trevor simultaneously submitted our full documentation to the federal authorities. Leah would ensure several financial journalists received anonymous tips about major fraud allegations at Mitchell Pharmaceuticals, guaranteeing media attention that would make the case harder to bury. The morning of the board meeting, I dressed in my best suit, not the expensive tailored kind Kimberly favored, but professional enough to be taken seriously. I carried a single leather portfolio containing selected evidence, with digital copies secured in multiple locations as insurance. The receptionist at Mitchell Pharmaceuticals headquarters did a double take when I gave my name. Mr. Mitchell? I don't see you on the attendance list. I smiled politely. Family privilege. Please let the board know I'm here. Minutes later, my father's longtime assistant Margaret appeared, looking flustered. Mason! This is unexpected. The meeting is about to start, and your sister will just have to deal with my presence, I finished for her. It's still partly my family's company, Margaret. She hesitated, then nodded and led me to the boardroom. When I walked in, the conversation instantly died. 12 pairs of eyes turned to me, but I only cared about 2: my father's confused gaze and Kimberly's momentarily shocked expression, quickly masked by a professional smile. Mason, she said smoothly, rising from her seat at the head of the table. What an unexpected surprise. We're about to begin a private board meeting, so perhaps we could catch up afterward. Actually, I replied. My father frowned. Son, Kimberly is running the company now. These are busy people who should be very interested to learn about Project Lazarus. I interrupted, opening my portfolio. And about the creative accounting that's been hiding its existence from regulatory oversight. The tension in the room was immediate and palpable. Kimberly's smile didn't waver, but her knuckles whitened as she gripped the back of her chair. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said calmly. "There is no such project." I withdrew the first document, a financial statement with Project Lazarus clearly listed, bearing her signature. "Then perhaps you could explain this? And the other $5 million diverted from legitimate research programs over the past 3 years?" One of the board members, Dr. Howard Brenton, leaned forward to examine the document I'd placed on the table. "What is this, Kimberly? I've never seen this project in any of our R&D reports." "It's obviously fabricated," Kimberly said dismissively. "My brother has had difficulties accepting his place in the family. This is clearly an attempt to embarrass me." I had anticipated this response. "Would 12 dead test subjects agree it's fabricated?" I asked quietly, placing photographs of the victims on the table alongside their falsified death certificates. "Or the FDA investigators who are, as we speak, receiving comprehensive documentation of unauthorized human trials conducted under this company's roof?" The boardroom erupted into concerned murmurs. Kimberly's facade cracked slightly, a flash of panic crossing her features before she regained control. "This is absurd," she snapped. "Mason has been unstable for years. He was caught stealing our mother's medications during her illness. Now he's fabricating evidence because he's bitter about his inheritance." I had expected this too. I pulled out my final piece of evidence, a tablet cued to play my mother's last recording. Her frail voice filled the room, describing Kimberly's threats and the poisoning. When she addressed me directly, explaining her plan to trap Kimberly, I watched the blood drain from my sister's face. My father, who had been watching in confused silence, suddenly stood. "That's Eleanor's voice," he said, his own voice shaking. "What is this, Mason? What's happening?" Before I could answer, the boardroom doors opened, and 4 people entered: 2 FBI agents, an FDA investigator, and Trevor, looking grimly satisfied. "Kimberly Mitchell?" one of the agents said. "We have some questions about Project Lazarus and the financial records of Mitchell Pharmaceuticals." What followed was chaos. Kimberly attempted to dismiss the allegations, then to blame subordinates, then finally to flee. She made it as far as the elevator before being detained. The board members, shocked and concerned about their own liability, quickly began cooperating with investigators. My father collapsed into his chair, looking suddenly older and frilier than I'd ever seen him. I went to him, kneeling beside his chair. "Dad, you've been poisoned," I said gently. "The same thing that happened to Mom is happening to you, just more slowly. We need to get you to a hospital." He looked at me with clouded eyes that suddenly cleared, a flash of the sharp, decisive man he'd once been. "Your mother knew, didn't she? She left you that phone on purpose." I nodded. "She was gathering evidence all along. She knew what Kimberly was doing but was too weak to stop her directly." My father closed his eyes briefly. "I failed you both. I believed Kimberly because it was easier than facing the truth." "We can talk about that later," I said, helping him to his feet. "Right now, we need to get the poison out of your system." As we left the boardroom, escorted by one of the FBI agents, I caught a glimpse of Kimberly being led toward a different elevator. Our eyes met briefly, and I saw something I'd never seen in my sister's gaze before: fear. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of medical treatments, legal proceedings, and corporate damage control. My father was hospitalized and treated for heavy metal poisoning, gradually regaining his strength and mental clarity as the toxins left his system. Kimberly, faced with overwhelming evidence, eventually accepted a plea deal that would still mean at least 20 years in prison. The charges included fraud, attempted murder, corporate malfeasance, and 12 counts of negligent homicide related to the Project Lazarus test subjects. Mitchell Pharmaceuticals survived, though barely. With my father recovering and Kimberly disgraced, leadership of the company fell temporarily to the board, with my input as the only uninvolved family member. It was a position I had never sought or wanted, but for my father's sake and for the thousands of employees whose livelihoods depended on the company, I stepped up. 6 months after that fateful board meeting, my father and I sat in the garden of the family home, watching the sunset. His health had improved remarkably, though doctors warned some neurological effects of the poisoning might be permanent. "Your mother always knew you were the stronger one," he said suddenly. "Not in Kimberly's way, not the ruthless ambition or the perfect image, but in character, in integrity." I didn't know how to respond. After years of feeling like the family disappointment, his words were both validating and painful, an acknowledgement that came too late for my mother to share. "She left you the most valuable thing she had," he continued. "Not money or shares, but the truth. And you used it exactly as she hoped you would." He reached over and gripped my hand with surprising strength. "I'm proud of you, son. And I'm so sorry for doubting you." It wasn't everything. It couldn't erase the months of isolation during my mother's illness, or heal all the wounds of the past. But it was a start, a foundation on which we might build something new from the ashes of what we'd lost. As twilight deepened around us, I thought about the journey ahead, rebuilding the company ethically, ensuring justice for those harmed by Kimberly's actions, and perhaps most challenging of all, learning to be a family again, just the two of us. It wouldn't be easy. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. 1 year after Kimberly's arrest, the world had moved on to newer scandals, but the Mitchell family was still piecing itself back together. The media frenzy had eventually died down, though occasional articles still appeared whenever there was a development in Kimberly's case. She was serving her sentence at a federal correctional facility, having exhausted her appeals. Mitchell Pharmaceuticals had survived the crisis, though not without significant changes. Under my reluctant guidance and my father's experienced advice during his stronger days, we had restructured the company entirely. We shut down several questionable research initiatives, established an independent ethics board with actual power, and created a whistleblower program with robust protections. Most importantly, we had initiated a victim compensation fund for the families of those who had died during Project Lazarus trials. No amount of money could bring back their loved ones, but we could at least ensure they didn't suffer financially for Kimberly's crimes. I had moved back to Boston, taking an apartment downtown rather than returning to the family estate. Some boundaries were necessary for my own healing. But I visited my father regularly, our relationship slowly rebuilding on more honest foundations. On a crisp October morning, I arrived at the house to find him in his study, more alert and engaged than he'd been in months. The treatments had worked well, though doctors warned some cognitive effects might never fully reverse. "Mason," he greeted me, setting aside the company reports he'd been reviewing. "I've been thinking about your mother's foundation proposal." After inheriting Kimberly's forfeited shares, I had suggested using a portion of the recovered assets to establish a patient advocacy foundation in Eleanor's name. It would focus on protecting vulnerable patients in clinical trials and providing oversight where regulatory bodies fell short. "What about it?" I asked, taking my usual seat across from him. "I think it's time we moved forward. In fact, I've drafted some initial paperwork." He slid a folder across the desk. "The Eleanor Mitchell Foundation for Patient Advocacy. With you as the director, if you're willing." I opened the folder, scanning the preliminary documents. It was well thought out, with clear mission statements and governance structures. "You've put a lot of work into this." "It's been therapeutic," he admitted. "A way to make some amends, perhaps. Your mother would have wanted her legacy to help people, not harm them." We spent the morning refining the proposal, my father's business acumen still sharp despite everything he'd been through. It felt like old times, but better somehow, a partnership rather than the hierarchical relationship we'd always had. As we worked, I couldn't help reflecting on how much had changed in a year. The company was stabilizing. My father was recovering. And I had found a purpose I never expected, using the Mitchell resources and influence for genuine good. Yet there was still one shadow I couldn't seem to escape, the lingering guilt that I hadn't recognized the danger sooner. That I hadn't been able to save my mother. My father noticed my distraction. What is it? I hesitated, then decided on honesty. I still wonder if I could have done more. If I'd figured things out earlier, maybe Mom would still be here. He was quiet for a long moment. Your sister fooled everyone, Mason. She fooled me, her own father, for years. The doctors. The board. Everyone. He sighed heavily. The only one she didn't completely fool was your mother. Eleanor suspected something was wrong long before any of us. That's why she left you that phone. But if I just... No, he interrupted firmly. This isn't on you. If anyone failed, it was me. I was so proud of Kimberly's business success that I refused to see the person she'd become. He looked away, his expression pained. Did you know your mother tried to talk to me about Kimberly several times over the years? Little concerns at first, then bigger ones. I dismissed them all as maternal worry or jealousy over how much time Kimberly and I spent together on the business. This was new information. She never told me that. She wouldn't have. Eleanor was protective of you, she didn't want to put you in the middle. He met my eyes again. The truth is, you did exactly what your mother hoped you would do with what she gave you. You brought everything to light. You saved me. You saved the company. And you made sure Kimberly can't hurt anyone else. His words helped, though they couldn't completely dissolve the knot of grief and regret I still carried. Some wounds would take more time to heal. That afternoon, I decided to visit my mother's grave for the first time since the funeral. I'd avoided it, partly because of painful memories of that day with Kimberly celebrating her ill-gotten inheritance, and partly because it felt too final. The cemetery was quiet, just a few distant visitors among the well-maintained grounds. My mother's headstone was elegant black granite, simple but dignified. I placed the white roses I'd brought and stood awkwardly, not sure what to say or do. I got your message, Mom, I finally said aloud. I did what you asked? I just wish. My voice caught. I wish you could have seen it. I wish we could have worked together. The breeze rustled the nearby trees, sending a shower of autumn leaves across the path. It wasn't an answer, but it was peaceful. As I turned to leave, I noticed a groundskeeper watching me from a respectful distance. When our eyes met, he approached. Mr. Mitchell? Mason Mitchell? I nodded, instantly wary. Even now, I half expected more accusations or problems. I have something for you, he said, reaching into his pocket. Your mother asked me to hold on to it until I saw you here alone. Said you'd come when you were ready? He handed me a small envelope, worn around the edges as if it had been carried for a long time. My name was written on the front in my mother's elegant handwriting. Stunned, I thanked him, waiting until he had walked away before opening it with trembling fingers. Inside was a single page of stationery, my mother's personal paper with the small embossed lily in the corner. My dearest Mason, it began. If you're reading this, then everything has either gone terribly wrong or remarkably right. Either way, you're at my grave, and I am gone. I want you to know that of all the things I've done in my life, the charities chaired, the galas organized, the social connections cultivated, nothing has ever made me as proud as being your mother. You have always been my greatest joy, even when I couldn't show it as I should have. Your father and I made many mistakes in raising. Whatever happens next, remember this. The true Mitchell legacy isn't a pharmaceutical company or a fortune. It's the choice to do what's right, even when it's difficult. It's using privilege to protect others, not to exploit them. I trust you to rebuild what your sister has broken, to heal what can be healed, and to create something better from the ashes. All my love, always, Mom. I read the letter 3 times, tears blurring the words, before carefully folding it and placing it in my wallet. It wasn't closure, I didn't believe in such neat endings anymore, but it was something equally valuable: permission to move forward. Over the next few months, the Eleanor Mitchell Foundation took shape. We focused initially on helping the families affected by Project Lazarus, then expanded to advocate for transparency in pharmaceutical research more broadly. It was meaningful work, though challenging fighting against the same systems and incentives that had corrupted Kimberly. My father continued to improve, taking on an advisory role in both the company and the foundation. Our relationship wasn't perfect, but it was honest now, no more family myths or polite fictions about who we were and what mattered. As for Kimberly, I visited her once in prison, 6 months after her sentencing. I wasn't sure why I went: closure, curiosity, or perhaps just to confirm she was really there, unable to hurt anyone else. She refused to see me. I wasn't surprised, but I also wasn't disappointed. Some bridges couldn't and shouldn't be rebuilt. On the anniversary of my mother's death, I returned to her grave with more white roses. This time, I didn't feel the crushing weight of grief and guilt, just a quiet sadness mixed with gratitude for her final gift to me, not the evidence that brought down Kimberly, but the knowledge that she had seen me clearly all along, had trusted me when no one else did. "You were right, Mom," I said softly to the headstone. "The greatest inheritance wasn't the money. It was the truth. And I promise I'm using it well." As I walked back through the cemetery, phone calls and meetings about the foundation waiting for me, I reflected on the journey of the past 2 years. From family outcast to reluctant corporate leader. From grieving son to architect of a new legacy. It wasn't the life I had expected, but it was meaningful in ways my previous existence had never been. The old iPhone that had started it all sat in a safe in my apartment, preserved as evidence and reminder. Sometimes I thought about the twist of fate that had led my mother to leave me that particular inheritance, the one thing Kimberly had overlooked because it seemed worthless compared to the fortune she was stealing. It made me wonder how often the most valuable things in life are disguised as the least impressive. How easy it is to overlook what truly matters while chasing the obvious prizes. That was the final lesson my mother taught me, and one I tried to honor each day: look deeper. Question appearances. And never underestimate the power of truth, however long it takes to come to light. So what about you? Have you ever discovered something valuable in what initially seemed worthless? Or have you experienced betrayal from someone you trusted? Share your stories in the comments below. And if this journey resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of justice and healing. Remember, sometimes our greatest strength comes from our deepest wounds. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the truth in your own life, wherever it may be hidden.